We demand rigidly defined areas of doubt and uncertainty. Douglas Adams. There exists a peculiar tension in the human heart. We crave order while swimming in chaos. We construct elaborate plans while standing on ground that shifts beneath our feet. Every morning, we rise and pretend the day will unfold according to our expectations, as though willpower alone could hold back the tide of accident and chance. And then, the phone rings with unexpected news. A stranger's glance lingers a moment too long and becomes the beginning of something unforeseen. The train we meant to catch pulls away just as we reach the platform, and in missing it, our entire trajectory changes in ways we will never fully comprehend. The ancient Greeks had a word for this, kairos, the opportune moment, the time when something significant happens, not because we planned it, but because the conditions aligned in ways beyond our orchestration. It stands in contrast to chronos, the measured, predictable march of clock time. We live most of our lives in chronos, scheduling appointments and counting hours, but the moments we remember, the ones that alter us, arrive through kairos, unbidden, unscheduled, and utterly beyond our control. Consider how a tree grows. It does not agonize over which direction to extend its branches. When wind batters it from the west, it bends and thickens its trunk on that side. When a neighboring tree falls and opens a gap in the canopy, it reaches toward the light without deliberation or regret for all the potential shapes it might have taken. The tree participates in a dance with forces it neither understands nor resists. Its beauty emerges not despite these random pressures, but because of them. Each knot and curve tells the story of accommodation to circumstances beyond its choosing. Human beings, burdened with consciousness and memory, cannot achieve this natural surrender so easily. We remember how things might have gone differently. We calculate probabilities and imagine alternate timelines where different choices led to different outcomes. This capacity for reflection is our glory and our curse. It allows us to learn from experience, but it also tempts us into the exhausting fantasy that we could have controlled what was never ours to control. The medieval Islamic scholars developed an entire theological framework around this tension. They called it qadar, divine decree, and predestination. But their understanding was subtler than simple fatalism. They distinguished between what was written and how one met what was written. A merchant loses his entire fortune in a storm at sea. The loss was decreed, but his response, whether he falls into bitterness or finds unexpected freedom in having nothing left to lose, remains his own. The randomness of the storm and the choice of how to meet it occupy different orders of reality, both true, both mattering, and neither canceling the other out. In Japanese aesthetics, this principle manifests as wabi-sabi, the appreciation of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. A tea bowl is more beautiful for the irregularities in its glaze, the asymmetry of its shape, and the small chip that records its history of use. The practitioner of wabi-sabi does not merely tolerate these imperfections, but recognizes them as essential to beauty itself. Perfection, in this view, is sterile, inhuman, and death-like in its static completeness. Life expresses itself through flux, through the random interventions that mar and mark everything that exists in time. The potter works the clay, but cannot control exactly how it will respond to the wheel, how the glaze will flow and pool in the kiln's heat, or which cracks will appear as it cools. The master potter learns to collaborate with these unpredictable elements, rather than fight them. The novice sees each unexpected outcome as a failure. The master sees each as a revelation, the material speaking, asserting its own nature, offering possibilities the human mind alone could never have conceived. This wisdom appears in unexpected places. Jazz musicians speak of playing the space between the notes, of listening so intently to each other that the music emerges not from any individual's plan, but from the collective response to each moment as it unfolds. Miles Davis famously said, "Do not fear mistakes. There are none." In the improvisational moment, what might have been an error becomes the foundation for the next phrase, integrated seamlessly into the evolving whole. The music teaches the musicians to trust the process, to surrender the illusion of complete control while remaining utterly present and responsive. The neuroscientist David Eagleman has shown that our experience of making decisions is largely illusory. The brain initiates actions milliseconds before consciousness registers having made a choice. We experience ourselves as captains of the ship, but the ship has often already begun to turn before the captain becomes aware of issuing the order. This is not to say free will doesn't exist in any meaningful sense, but rather that our relationship to our own agency is more mysterious and more distributed across conscious and unconscious processes than our subjective experience suggests. What does it mean to accept this? Not to resign ourselves to passive drifting, but to recognize that we are more like surfers than ship captains choosing which waves to ride, positioning ourselves as skillfully as we can, but always ultimately at the mercy of forces far larger than ourselves. The surfer who fights the wave drowns. The surfer who reads the wave and moves with it experiences something that feels like both complete control and complete surrender, which are revealed to be not opposites but complementary aspects of the same graceful engagement with what is. In the deserts of North Africa, there is a beetle that survives by doing handstands at dawn. Fog rolls in from the coast, and the beetle angles its body so moisture condenses on its back and rolls down into its mouth. It did not invent this strategy through conscious deliberation. It does not understand meteorology. Yet it survives in one of Earth's harshest environments through perfect attunement to conditions it never chose and cannot change. The beetle's wisdom is not intellectual, but embodied a wisdom of response rather than control. There is a practice among certain Tibetan monks called khud, which translates roughly as cutting through. The practitioner goes to frightening places, graveyards, wilderness areas, and through ritual and meditation deliberately invites terrifying experiences. The goal is not to overcome fear through conquest, but to cut through the illusion that we can make ourselves invulnerable. By facing what cannot be controlled, the practitioner discovers a strange fearlessness that has nothing to do with feeling safe, and everything to do with releasing the exhausting project of trying to guarantee safety. This is not recklessness. The monk going to the graveyard does not court actual danger, but rather works with the mind's habit of seeing danger everywhere, of treating uncertainty itself as the ultimate threat. By sitting with that uncertainty, by feeling the full force of how much we cannot know or control, something shifts. The fear remains, but it no longer paralyzes. The uncertainty remains, but it no longer feels like an emergency requiring immediate resolution. Western psychology has recently begun to study what it calls uncertainty tolerance, the capacity to remain functional and even thrive while outcomes remain ambiguous. High uncertainty tolerance correlates with resilience, creativity, and psychological health. Low uncertainty tolerance correlates with anxiety, rigidity, and the kinds of defensive certainties that make people vulnerable to authoritarianism and conspiracy theories. The mind that cannot tolerate "I don't know" fills the gap with any story, however implausible, rather than rest in openness. But how does one develop this tolerance? Not through belief or positive thinking, but through direct experience of surviving what we feared we could not survive. The first time we are utterly lost and find our way. The first time a cherished plan collapses and we discover we can build something different from the rubble. The first time we are certain we know what will happen next and are completely wrong, but find the actual outcome no worse, sometimes even better than what we expected. Each of these experiences, if we can stay present to them, rather than immediately constructing new certainties, weakens the grip of the need to control. There is a story told in many forms, across many cultures. A farmer's horse runs away. His neighbors say, "What bad luck?" He replies, "Maybe." The horse returns with wild horses. "What good luck?" they say. "Maybe," he answers. His son tries to tame a wild horse and breaks his leg. "How terrible!" Again, "Maybe." Then soldiers come conscripting young men for war, but the son's broken leg exempts him. "What good fortune?" And still the farmer says only, "Maybe." The story appears simple, even simplistic, at first glance. But it points towards something profound, the impossibility of judging events in isolation, the way outcomes ripple forward and backward through time, in ways that mock our categories of fortunate and unfortunate. The farmer's wisdom lies not in seeing the future, but in refusing the compulsion to pretend he can. Each maybe is not uncertainty, but humility, the recognition that he stands too close to events to know their ultimate significance. That significance itself might be a story we tell, rather than a property inherent in things. Medieval cartographers, when they reached the edges of their knowledge, would write, "Here be dragons." We think of this as charming superstition, but perhaps it expressed something true. That the unknown is not empty, but full of possibilities, both threatening and wondrous, full of what we have not yet encountered or imagined. The dragons were real, not as literal creatures, but as symbols of the mind's tendency to people the unknown with monsters. Yet sometimes the unknown contains dragons, and sometimes it contains new continents, and sometimes it contains both, and the only way to discover which is to sail on despite the uncertainty. The physicist Richard Feynman spoke of the pleasure of finding things out, but he also spoke eloquently about the pleasure of not knowing. He described looking at the stars and feeling two contradictory things simultaneously, understanding something of the mechanisms behind their light and feeling the full force of their mystery, undiminished by that understanding. He said that knowing we are made of atoms that once were inside stars did not make the stars less wonderful, but more so. The scientific understanding did not resolve mystery into banality, but opened on to deeper mysteries. This suggests that the peace of accepting randomness is not the peace of ignorance or resignation, but something more paradoxical. The peace that comes from looking clearly at what is, including what cannot be understood or controlled, and finding that we can bear it. That we can, in fact, do more than bear it. We can participate in it, dance with it, allow it to surprise and teach us in ways that our planned, controlled, predictable lives never could. Consider how we learn language as children. No one sits an infant down and teaches grammar rules. The child is immersed in a flood of sounds, most of which are incomprehensible, connected to contexts that must be decoded through trial and error. The process is fundamentally one of pattern recognition emerging from chaos. The child does not know what a verb is, but learns to use verbs correctly. The child does not understand that grammar exists, but speaks grammatically. Consciousness of the rules comes later, after the embodied knowledge is already there. Perhaps this is the model for how we might relate to the larger patterns of existence. We are immersed in them, participating in them, and shaped by them long before we can articulate them. The attempt to fully understand before we act is paralysis. The wisdom is in the acting, in the responding, and in the conversation with reality that happens through engagement, rather than through standing apart and analyzing. The Aboriginal Australians practice what they call walkabout, young people going into the wilderness to follow songlines, the dreaming tracks that map both physical landscape and mythic meaning. They navigate by singing the country into being, following verses that describe landmarks and waterholes. The journey is both completely planned, every step encoded in song learned from elders, and completely open, because the country is alive and changing. Because what matters is not reaching a destination, but the walking itself, the deepening relationship with land and story, and one's own emerging adulthood. This provides another model, not choosing between plan and spontaneity, between order and randomness, but moving in the space where they interpenetrate. The songline is a structure, but each walking is unique. The country is known, but each encounter with it is new. The self undertaking the journey is continuous with the child who learned the songs but will return transformed in ways no one can predict. There is a quality of attention that becomes possible when we release the need to control outcomes. Instead of scanning for threats and opportunities and calculating and strategizing, the attention can rest more fully in what is actually present, the texture of bark under our fingertips, the particular way light falls through leaves at this hour, the expression on a stranger's face as they pass. None of these things advance our agenda, yet each is a small eternity, a portal into depth, if we can meet it without immediately translating it into use or meaning or implication for our projects. The poet, Mary Oliver, asked, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" It's a famous question, often quoted in graduation speeches as a call to purpose and achievement. But read in the context of her actual work poems that dwell on grasshoppers and ponds, and doing nothing in particular except noticing the question takes on different weight. Perhaps the answer is not a 5-year plan, but a quality of attention, a way of meeting each moment as it arrives, neither clinging nor resisting, but present to its specific, irreplaceable texture. This is not anti-ambition or anti-planning. We still catch the train when we can. We still work toward goals that matter to us. But we hold it all more lightly, with some humor about our grandiosity in imagining we write the script. The universe is collaborative rather than obedient. It takes our efforts and works with them, producing outcomes adjacent to what we intended, close enough to claim as success, but different in 10,000 small ways that accumulate into a life we never quite imagined and could not have chosen, but which is nevertheless ours. The peace comes from this recognition that we are not alone in making our lives. That forces beyond our comprehension, from quantum fluctuations to the weather, to the independent wills of 7 billion other humans, are also participants in what emerges. That our control was always partial, always provisional, always an illusion we maintained through selective attention and post hoc rationalization. And that releasing this illusion does not make us powerless, but rather frees the power we actually possess to flow more naturally, more responsively, and more aligned with what is, rather than what we wish were so. There is a Hasidic teaching that says we should carry 2 pieces of paper in our pockets. On one is written, "I am but dust and ashes." On the other, "For my sake was the world created." Both truths must be held simultaneously. We are infinitesimal, our lives no more significant than the beetle doing handstands in the desert. And we are infinitely concentrated into a point of consciousness, each of us the center from which an entire universe radiates. Both are true. The mistake is choosing one and denying the other. Accepting randomness means holding both these truths without resolution. We matter infinitely and not at all. Our choices shape everything and nothing. We are authors of our lives and characters in a story written by no one and everyone. The contradictions are not problems to solve, but the very structure of the situation we find ourselves in. To insist they resolve into one coherent narrative is to miss what is actually occurring, something wilder, more mysterious, and more alive than any narrative can capture. In quantum mechanics, particles exist in superposition multiple states simultaneously until measurement collapses them into definiteness. Before observation, the electron is not somewhere we don't know about. It is genuinely nowhere specific, everywhere potential. The mathematics describes not our ignorance, but reality itself. And when the observation occurs, which state actualizes, appears to be fundamentally random, not determined by any hidden variable we've failed to measure. This is not a metaphor. This is how reality actually behaves at the finest scales physics can measure. And these quantum uncertainties cascade upward through every level of organization until they reach us, our choices, and our seemingly solid world of tables and chairs and consequences. We are not separate from this uncertainty, but made of it, expressions of it. Uncertainty becomes conscious and looks back at itself with wonder and confusion. What does this mean for how we live? Perhaps nothing. The collapse of quantum superpositions is too fine-grained to notice in daily life. Or perhaps everything. If uncertainty is woven into the fabric of being, then our wrestling with it is not peripheral but essential, not a bug in human consciousness, but what human consciousness is for. We are the universe's way of experiencing its own openness, its resistance to final determination, and its endless creativity in generating the new from moment to moment. The astronomer Carl Sagan spoke of humanity as a way for the cosmos to know itself. But if we take quantum uncertainty seriously, we are also a way for the cosmos to not know itself, to be surprised by itself, and to remain perpetually in question, even as local patches of order and pattern temporarily stabilize. Our uncertainty is cosmic uncertainty localized, and our peace in not knowing might be the cosmos at peace with its own unfinishedness, its own refusal of closure. This veers into speculation, perhaps, but even the speculation reveals something: how desperately we want the universe to make sense, to be one way or another, either meaningful or meaningless, ordered or chaotic, friendly or hostile, and how persistently reality refuses these binaries, presenting itself as both and neither, as something our categories cannot quite capture. The peace comes not from finally getting the categories right, but from releasing the demand that reality conform to categories at all. There are moments when this peace descends like grace. Walking through a city at night when the streets are nearly empty. Standing in an art museum before a painting that arrests you, though you cannot say why. Lying in grass and watching clouds reconfigure themselves according to fluid dynamics and whim. In these moments, the usual anxiety about the past and future loosens. The mind rests in what is, content to perceive without immediately narrativizing or judging or placing in service of some agenda. These moments cannot be forced, but they can be invited, by practices that train attention to rest in the present. By regularly doing things that have no purpose beyond themselves, walking not to get somewhere, but to walk, listening to music not as background but as the foreground, sitting with another person in silence that needs no filling. Each of these small acts weakens the tyranny of instrumentality, the habit of treating every moment as a means to some other end, never quite arriving at the end because the arrival was always meant to be one more step away. The Trappist monk Thomas Merton wrote from his hermitage about doing nothing in particular, sitting on his porch, watching the weather, and letting hours pass unmarked by achievement. He was not escaping the world, but meeting it more fully, without the filter of agenda. From that stillness, he wrote some of the most penetrating social criticism of his era, not despite the stillness, but because of it, because he had touched something beneath the noise, something both emptier and fuller than the busyness most of us mistake for necessity. We fear emptiness, equate it with worthlessness, and fill every moment with stimulation and tasks. But emptiness is also potential, the blank page before the poem, the silence before the music, the space without which no thing could appear. Accepting randomness requires learning to tolerate emptiness, to rest in the gaps between one thing and the next without immediately reaching for what's familiar or controllable. In those gaps, something genuinely new becomes possible. The choreographer Merce Cunningham created dances by consulting the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes, to determine what movements would come next. Critics initially saw this as gimmickry, but Cunningham discovered that introducing randomness freed him from habitual patterns and opened possibilities his trained mind would never have considered. The results were strange, sometimes awkward, but alive in a way that choreography optimized by familiar aesthetic criteria was not. Randomness became a collaborator, a way to access intelligence beyond the personal. This suggests a different relationship to not knowing, not as a deficit to overcome, but as a resource to draw upon, a way beyond the limits of what we already understand or have already imagined. Every genuine discovery emerges from the unknown. Every authentic encounter surprises us. If we could fully control our experiences, making them conform to expectations, we would never encounter anything truly other, anything that could challenge and expand and transform us. The microbiologist Lynn Margulis spent decades arguing for a theory of evolution that her peers largely dismissed. That major evolutionary innovations came not through gradual adaptation, but through organisms absorbing other organisms, incorporating their genetic material in massive leaps of complexity. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, were once independent bacteria that entered into symbiotic relationships with the ancestors of our cells. We are, in other words, composite creatures, collaborations between organisms that merged by accident and discovered mutual benefit. This is both literal biology and rich metaphor. We are not unified, coherent selves, but communities, federations, and ecosystems in human form. The bacteria in our gut, without which we could not digest food, outnumber our own cells. The mites living in our eyelashes are part of being human. Consciousness itself might be an emergent property of networks, rather than a thing any individual neuron possesses. Identity becomes porous, boundaries softer than we imagined. If this is so, then control was always illusory. How can we control what we are, not even unified enough to assign clear borders to? But if we are communities rather than isolated individuals, then we are also never as alone as we fear. We exist in relationships with microbiomes, with families, with societies, with ecosystems, with the air we breathe and the water we drink, relationships we did not choose and cannot leave, but which constitute what we are. Randomness in this context is simply the unpredictability inherent in any system complex enough to be interesting, any system involving actual relationship rather than one-way control. The ecologist Robin Wall Kimmerer writes of the grammar of animacy in her indigenous language, where beings are classified not by whether they are human, but by whether they are alive and acting in the world. A bay is animate, a rock is animate, fire is animate. Each is a subject rather than an object. Each possesses something like agency. Each must be addressed with respect rather than treated as mere resource. This grammar embeds in language itself a worldview in which humans are participants in a community of beings rather than masters of inert matter. Learning such a language would reshape perception, but even without the language, we can begin to practice the perception, treating what we encounter as having its own nature, its own purposes, its own responses that are not merely reactions to our will, but expressions of its own being. The garden grows according to principles we can learn and work with, but never fully control. The pet has moods and preferences we can learn to read, but never fully predict. Even our own bodies surprise us, healing when we expected, worsening, falling ill despite our best prevention, responding in their own time according to their own wisdom. To accept randomness, then, is to accept that we live in a world of subjects rather than objects, a world in which everything has at least a minimal degree of autonomy, of self-direction, of unpredictability. This is not anthropomorphism, but recognition that even systems we can describe with equations retain a degree of sensitivity to initial conditions, of dependence on factors too numerous to track, that renders them practically unpredictable even when they are theoretically determined. The weather is determined by physics, yet chaos theory tells us that exact prediction beyond a few days is impossible in principle, not merely in current practice. The equations are solvable, but the solutions are so sensitive to tiny variations that perfect knowledge of initial conditions would require infinite precision, which would require infinite time to measure, which means the prediction would arrive after the event. Determinism and unpredictability coexist in the same system. This is not a paradox, but the nature of complexity. We are complex in this way, determined by genetics, by neurobiology, by history, and by conditioning, yet unpredictable even to ourselves. We surprise ourselves. We act out of character. We make choices that retrospectively seem inevitable, but which felt utterly open in the moment of choosing. Both are true. We are shaped by everything that came before, and we are free within the constraints of that shaping. The freedom is real, but not absolute. The determinism is real, but not totalizing. And the gap between them, the space where neither quite captures what occurs, is the space we actually inhabit. This gap has a name in phenomenology: the lived body, the body as we experience it from inside, rather than as others observe it from outside. From outside, my body is an object in space, subject to gravity and physics and biochemistry. From inside, my body is how the world appears, the perspective from which everything else is known, and the felt texture of being here rather than there. Both are my body, but they do not quite coincide. There is a gap, a space of ambiguity, in which something like freedom appears. Accepting randomness does not resolve this ambiguity, but learns to inhabit it without demanding resolution. We are both object and subject, both determined and free, and both insignificant and central. These are not stages to progress through, but tensions to balance and polarities to hold in creative suspension. The peace comes not from choosing sides, but from developing the capacity to dwell in paradox without collapsing it prematurely into false simplicity. There is a practice in some meditation traditions called just sitting, not focusing on breath or repeating a mantra or visualizing anything, but simply sitting upright and allowing whatever arises to arise and pass. Thoughts come and go, sensations emerge and dissolve, emotions wash through. The instruction is neither to follow them nor suppress them, but simply to let them be, to remain steadily present as the witness of whatever occurs without identifying with any particular content as me. In this practice, randomness becomes visceral. The mind produces thoughts we did not consciously choose. Where do they come from? Attention wanders despite our intention to remain present. Why does it wander there rather than elsewhere? An itch appears in the knee, then vanishes, then appears in the shoulder. What determines this choreography of sensation? We do not know. We cannot control it. And yet we remain present to it, and in that presence something shifts. What shifts is not the randomness, thoughts still arise unbidden, sensations still come and go, but our relationship to it. We discover we are not identical to the stream of consciousness, but the awareness in which it appears. This awareness is not random. It is steady, spacious, and capable of holding the random without being threatened by it. The thoughts and sensations are like weather, some pleasant, some unpleasant, all temporary, none defining the sky in which they appear. This is not transcendence in the sense of leaving the body or escaping time. The sky metaphor can mislead if taken too literally. We do not become detached observers floating above experience. Rather, we discover a dimension of experience that is always already present, but usually overlooked. The simple fact of being aware, prior to, and more fundamental than any particular content of awareness. This awareness is intimate, not distant. It is closer to us than our own thoughts, but it is also vast, capable of containing multitudes without strain. Finding this awareness does not make randomness disappear or become less random. The unpredictable remains unpredictable. But it loses its power to destabilize us because we have found a ground that is not itself subject to the fluctuations it witnesses. This ground is not something we construct or achieve, but something we recognize as having been there all along, like noticing the screen on which the movie plays after years of being absorbed solely in the plot. The plot continues. The movie still matters. We still care about the characters and hope for certain outcomes. But we are no longer solely identified with the drama, no longer utterly at the mercy of each reversal and surprise. There is a dimension in which we rest steady regardless of what unfolds, not because we have become callous or detached, but because we have found a place in ourselves that is larger than what occurs. This is the strange piece of accepting life's randomness, not the piece of having figured it all out, not the piece of control, not even the piece of knowing everything will be okay because we don't know that, and often it won't be. It is rather the piece of being adequate to whatever comes, of having touched something in ourselves that can meet both joy and sorrow, both order and chaos, with the same fundamental openness. Not indifference, but a deep okayness that does not depend on circumstances conforming to our preferences. And perhaps this okayness is not ours alone. Perhaps it is the universe's own okayness with itself, its deep yes to its own nature, which includes randomness as essential rather than accidental. We are that, yes, localized, made conscious, and able to affirm or deny, but ultimately expressing what already is existence happening, reality unfolding, and the great mystery of being continuing its eternal improvisation. To live well in randomness is to join that improvisation as full participants, bringing what we can bring, responding with all our intelligence and heart, but without the crushing weight of imagining we write the script alone. We are co-creators in a collaboration so vast we will never see its full extent, working with partners we cannot fully know, toward ends we cannot fully determine. And this, rather than diminishing our significance, might be what grants us the freedom to truly live not as isolated authors struggling to control an inert world, but as creative voices in an ongoing conversation, a jazz session, where each player listens deeply and responds, where the music emerges from attention and presence rather than plan, where the next moment is always genuinely new, because no one, not even the universe itself, knows quite what will happen until it happens. And in that not knowing, that openness, that willingness to be surprised there is a strange piece. Not the peace of arrival, but the peace of dancing, of being in motion, of trusting the unknown not because it is trustworthy, but because trust is the only stance that keeps us alive to possibility. The randomness that once felt like threat becomes invitation. The chaos that seemed like disorder reveals itself as a creativity too wild to be contained in our categories. And we discover we have always been home, even in the midst of uncertainty, because home was never a place we could lose. It is the awareness that holds it all, the presence that remains when everything else changes. The strange peace at the heart of the storm that turns out to have been here all along, waiting for us to stop running long enough to notice.